So earlier I put out a quick video talking about Twitter's introduction of sort of the NFT profile picture, and it really sort of got me thinking more about why people sort of want to quote unquote invest in NFTs and sort of why they fall for this sort of scam and why is this scam so prevalent that other companies are willing to invest minimum effort because Twitter's profile thing is minimum effort. It's about probably about, from a developer standpoint, it's probably about less than a day of work for one individual. It takes that's nothing to flag a profile picture with a different tag on it. That's all you have to do. That's all they're really doing. But part of it is got me thinking of like, why do people fall for this? And the silly sort of reactionary response would be is that they are dumb, and that's never the case. Like, you should never ever blame someone being dumb for anything, because it basically is a dismissive argument, and it basically reduces someone's own actions and saying that what they are doing is not really their own actions, it's not their own decisions, not their own choices. And you should never call someone dumb and they're actually dumb because of that. The reality of it is it's a gap in knowledge. It's a combination of a gap in knowledge as well as the way that various industries have been going over years. And a lot of this really sort of comes back to what happened in the video game market. And when I say this, I'm most referring to the concept of the microtransaction. And now you might go, oh, how did we go from microtransactions? How NFTs is microtransactions? That's weird. Those are two very different things. But reality, they're not that different. What it really is that it's a fundamental concept that's been sort of ingrained in the people that you can buy something digitally that adds no real additional value to you, and that there's something that you control and that you own. And there's sort of this prevalent thought methodology that these sort of microtransactions sort of led to people to sort of really thinking about these sort of digital things as sort of ephemeral things that you can really own the same way I would own a physical object. And for the most part, I'm not 100% against the core concept of selling additional data, because we used to do this back in the day with sort of expansion packs. We basically reward people with additional information. And then you sort of had a model that sort of came on a little bit later, which was a subscription service where people would subscribe to a particular game. And really what this was both funding the game so that they could produce more content for it, but also keep their own servers running. But this was something that was not really viable for most companies. Most companies did not have a game that warranted allowing people to subscribe to it. And because of that, slowly but surely, the microtransaction sort of came in place. We sort of had this sort of micro DLC content that came around. And sort of since this sort of model started coming around, eventually this model sort of took flight, primarily in a lot of Korean MMOs, where basically they were purely funded via microtransactions. You basically could buy gear, characters, unlock content and features within these MMOs purely through microtransaction markets. And this was incredibly successful. This was insanely successful for a lot of these games. And because of this being so successful, this sort of translated over to a lot of the models that happened on Facebook early on with a lot of Facebook games. Your Farmvilles, your Mafia Wars, etc., where they sort of went by this exact same model. But basically all it was that you didn't buy the game, you basically just bought additional tries at the game. You bought additional plots of land in the game. And for the average player, they didn't pay anything, but you also had people who later on in the industry we started referring to as whales, who spent tons upon tons of money in these sorts of games. There was a statistic from not too long ago which basically said that a lot of mobile games are really only funded by like 1 or 2% of the population of people who play the games. Basically, spend enough money to pay all the salaries for all the employees, all the server costs, and all the additional money required to keep the game running. That it's really an insanely small percentage of people who spend the money to allow these games to run. It is referred to as whales. And now you might go, okay, so you started off with talking about the MMO model to the microtransaction model to stuff on Facebook and Farmville. How does this all link back to NFTs? And that's really simple. What it is that we all these different things have put in people's mind a skewed concept of cost, a skewed concept of how much effort is being put into making something versus how much effort it requires to spend on it. And then you have, just like we have with in our video games, you have sort of diamond currency and platinum currency and crystal currency or whatever, which obfuscates how much money you're actually spending. You have Ethereum and Bitcoin, which obfuscates how much real money you're actually spending, because at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I spent $10,000 for these Bitcoins, and I'm only spending a fraction of it on and I got like I got like 5 Bitcoin now, and I'm just spending a fraction of Bitcoin. In reality, what you just spent is thousands of your own dollars that you're never gonna get back. And now you're buying something in this sort of transactional thing of like, I am buying a profile picture of a monkey that in reality, if there's any other place, this is worth pennies because it's automatically generated. No one actually worked to make it. They basically bought a program, put a couple of layers together, and it auto generates random drawings. So its real value cost is like half a cent, but you're spending $1,000 on it because you think that one day someone wants to buy it for $2,000 or whatever, and that's not the case. Like people like to compare stuff to Beanie Babies, but it's really sort of any sort of ephemeral transaction rate thing where people think it's going to make money and it usually doesn't. These things don't have value because of the fact that they are so mass producible and repeatable. Even though they are quote unquote unique, they're not. They are incredibly ununique. They're all very, very similar. So to go back to why do I think people fall for the whole concept of the NFT, and that this really breaks down to the fact that the real world cost of things have been so obfuscated through these various layers that have been purposely put in place to distinguish someone from how much money they're actually spending, and that these people don't really know what they're buying, how much they're spending on what they're buying, and its actual real world worth, where they have some sort of fictional value in their head that doesn't really match what any sort of real world value would be. And at the end of the day, it is rather sad. And at the end of the day, I think that a lot of the NFT market is going to inevitably crash back down, where you have a lot of people who are going to not be able to resell the thing that they quote unquote earn, or you're going to have a lot of companies who made these things suddenly one day just turn off the servers and all the images are gone. And this is my thoughts.